It was 1988. My wife, Susan, and I set off on a road trip through Oregon, seeking solace in the serene embrace of autumn woods. The trees were ablaze with gold and crimson, and the air carried that crisp bite of fall. Our old RV rattled along the winding roads, a sanctuary of escape from life's suffocating burdens, work troubles for me, family grief for Susan. We loaded up the RV without a plan, just the hope that the wilderness could breathe life back into our tired souls. By midday, we pulled into Silver Falls State Park. The place was stunning, the kind of picturesque that made you think nothing bad could ever happen there. Susan unpacked a picnic under a towering maple while I parked near the back of the empty lot. We ate sandwiches to the soundtrack of rustling leaves and birdsong. "This was the right call, Jake," Susan said, a rare smile gracing her face. I needed this. She wasn't wrong. The forest felt like medicine. We hiked the trails, marveling at every twist and turn. By dusk, we were exhausted but content. Susan dozed off as I drove us to a nearby campground to settle in for the night. The lot was eerily quiet, just two other RVs, their windows dark. It felt peaceful at first, a sanctuary from the world. But as the night deepened, the peace curdled into unease. It started with the sounds. At first, they were subtle, faint snaps of twigs, the rustle of leaves. But then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circling the RV. I froze, the hair on my arms standing on end. "Susan," I whispered, shaking her awake. She groaned groggily. "What's wrong?" "Something's out there." I grabbed the flashlight, its weight reassuring in my hand, and peered out the window. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over shadowed trees and empty asphalt. For a moment, I thought I imagined it all. Then I saw it. A figure. Tall, hunched, and grotesque, it darted out of the light's reach, but not before I glimpsed its silhouette. A monstrous shape that didn't belong to anything natural. "Susan, stay down," I hissed. A heavy scrape echoed along the RV's side, metal shrieking against what sounded like claws. Then a hand pressed against the window. It wasn't human. Too long, too gnarled, leaving a greasy smear as it slid down the glass. The engine sputtered on the first key turn, my heart hammering with each failed attempt. "Come on," I growled, slamming my palm against the dashboard. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I floored it, speeding into the night. The forest seemed to close in around us, and the noises followed, fading only as we gained distance. We pulled into a remote rest stop, trembling and exhausted. The lights were dim, the place deserted. We locked the doors and huddled together, trying to convince ourselves it was over. But deep down, we knew better. The scratching began just past midnight, soft at first, like nails dragging across the RV's roof. Then came the thuds, calculated and unrelenting. Something was circling us, its intentions unmistakable. Susan clung to me, her breath hitching with every sound. "What does it want?" she whimpered. I didn't have an answer. The RV rocked violently as something massive landed on the roof. The metal groaned, bending under the weight. Whatever it was toying with us, while savoring our fear. "We have to move," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "Jake, we can't." "We have to." I grabbed the flashlight and threw the door open. Light spilled into the darkness, revealing our tormentor. It was a man, or what was left of one. His gaunt face was stretched into a feral snarl, his body unnaturally swollen with muscle, his skin caked in dirt and streaked with what I prayed wasn't blood. He moved like an animal, unnervingly fast and impossibly strong. "Run!" I yelled, shoving Susan forward. We bolted into the woods, the creature's guttural growls chasing us. Susan stumbled, and I hoisted her into my arms, adrenaline dulling the burn in my legs. Behind us, the RV groaned as the beast tore into it, its howls echoing through the trees. We broke through to the road just as a truck roared past, its horn blaring. The driver slammed on the brakes, and people spilled out of nearby cars, drawn by the commotion. "He's out there!" I shouted, barely able to catch my breath. A man with a shotgun stepped forward, his face grim. He fired into the woods, the blasts reverberating in the silence that followed. For a moment, hope flickered. Then came the roar. Closer, angrier. The man fired again, but the thing didn't stop. It was toying with us, savoring our terror. When the sirens finally wailed in the distance, the creature vanished, leaving only a trail of destruction and a deep, abiding fear. The police chalked it up to a deranged individual. The newspapers called it a cautionary tale. But Susan and I knew the truth. It wasn't a man. It was something older, something crueler. And it wasn't done with us. To this day, I can't sleep without seeing that handprint on the window, hearing the scratches on the roof. Every creak, every shadow feels like a warning. Because deep down, I know that whatever was out there that night, it's still hunting. And one day, it will find us again. It was late May when I pulled into Soa National Park. The name's Bramwell, just Bram to most. I've always had that itch to roam solo, and an RV seemed like the way to do it. Not some flimsy tent, mind you, but a home on wheels, complete with all the comforts to keep the wild at arm's length. This park, though, it's different, bigger than I imagined. Those massive trees aren't just trees, they're titans, ancient and silent, like they're guarding something they'll never share. I set up at a lower campground near the park entrance. Didn't want total isolation on my first trip. The first day was uneventful, peaceful even. I tackled some easy trails, took in the towering sequoias, and grilled a steak over the campfire. Life felt good, simple. But peace can lull you, make you forget how quickly everything can change. The next morning, I picked a trail farther off the beaten path, looking for solitude. About a mile in, I passed an older couple heading back. They gave me polite smiles, but as I moved to pass, the old man stopped. His face turned serious. "You heading up to Hollow Creek?" he asked. "Yeah, that's the plan," I said. He hesitated, his gaze shifting to the dense trees ahead. "Take a good look around when you get there. Say, people talk about strange things happening up that way." I chuckled, brushing it off as campfire tales, and continued on. But as I climbed, the forest silence deepened. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of my boots on the trail. By the time I reached Hollow Creek, the stillness was so thick it felt alive. The meadow spread out before me, serene yet wrong. The air was heavier here, the colors muted. My skin prickled, as if the atmosphere itself was rejecting me. Then I saw them. Footprints. Human, barefoot, smaller than mine. They shouldn't have been there. I was miles from any trailhead with no sign of another soul. I stared at the prints, my mind racing for an explanation. They led deeper into the woods, vanishing into the shadows. A cold dread settled over me, but curiosity pulled me forward. The deeper I followed, the stronger the feeling grew, that gnawing sense of being watched. The hair on my neck stood on end, and the woods around me felt like they were closing in. Finally, I turned back, unable to shake the sensation of eyes boring into me all the way to my RV. That night, I barely slept. Every rustle outside sent my heart racing. I left the lights on, feeling ridiculous but unable to face the dark. By the third day, I was sticking to crowded trails, trying to laugh off the unease gnawing at me. But the feeling never left. Then came the fourth day. I decided to move to the Kings Canyon section of the park, hoping a change of scenery would clear my head. I found a quiet pull-off near the road and settled in. The morning was calm, the view stunning. I was sipping coffee outside when I saw him. Far off, near the tree line, stood a man. He wasn't moving, just staring. From the distance, I couldn't make out details, but something about him was wrong. His clothes, dark and plain, seemed out of place in the wild. His stillness was unnerving, like he wasn't a man at all, but a statue. My pulse quickened. I stood and stepped backward into my RV, locking the door behind me. From the window, I watched him. He stayed there for what felt like an eternity before finally turning and vanishing into the trees. That night, I kept the RV locked up tight. Every shadow outside felt alive, every sound a threat. I told myself he was just a strange hiker, but I didn't believe it. The next morning, the knock came. It was soft, almost polite. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again, more insistent. My blood froze as I turned to the window beside my bed. He was there. His face was pressed against the glass, his dark eyes locked on mine. His skin was pale, his features sharp and gaunt, and his smile, God, that smile. It was slow, deliberate, and wrong, like he knew something about me, something I didn't. He knocked again, tilting his head as if to ask, "Are you going to let me in?" I couldn't move. My breath hitched, my chest tight. Then he raised a hand and beckoned, his fingers curling slowly. Panic flooded me. My eyes darted around the RV, the tire iron under the driver's seat. I just needed to reach it. As I inched forward, he suddenly stepped back. My relief was short-lived. A heavy thud came from above. The RV shook and my heart nearly stopped. He was on the roof. I clutched the tire iron, trembling as I heard the scraping of his boots moving across the metal. Then another thud, closer this time. My breath came in shallow gasps. When I couldn't take it anymore, anger surged through me, pushing out the fear. Gripping the tire iron, I bolted upright and hurled myself toward the door. The glass shattered as I swung, the tire iron connecting with bone. He stumbled back, his smile finally gone, replaced by a snarl of pain. Blood streaked his face as he staggered, then fled into the trees. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, fired up the RV, and drove. At the ranger station, they listened, skeptical but concerned. They searched the area, found no trace of him. To them, it was just another strange wilderness tale. But I know he's still out there, and I know he'll find someone else. A road trip out west isn't about the destination, it's the journey. The raw, unyielding beauty of the landscape takes center stage. Zion National Park, with its colossal red canyons and shimmering emerald pools, was our main event this year. Thaddeus and I, lifelong friends bound by a love of the outdoors, had made this annual RV trip a ritual. We picked up our rig in Denver, stocked up on supplies, and hit the road. Thaddeus, a nature photographer, always turned these trips into week-long photo shoots, obsessed with capturing the spiritual side of the wilderness. Me, I was just along for the ride, happy to swap motel grime for RV comfort. By the time we rolled into Springdale, Utah, a gateway to Zion, the moon hung heavy in the sky, casting the deserted Winchester Pines campground in an eerie glow. The place was empty, save for a monstrous black RV parked beneath a skeletal cottonwood. "Geez, look at that thing," I muttered. The rig was grotesque in its opulence, matte black, with windows tinted to a void. It looked more like a prison transport or a bunker on wheels than a camper. Thaddeus shrugged. "Some people don't know how to rough it. Come on, let's set up." We parked as far away as we could, but I couldn't shake the unease that crept over me. The monstrous RV loomed in the distance, its presence wrong, like a shadow cast by something unseen. Hours later, we were mid-poker game under the pale light of a lantern when I froze. A faint scratching broke the stillness. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Thaddeus nodded, setting his cards down slowly. The sound grew louder, deliberate. Whatever was outside wasn't scavenging. It was searching. "I'll check it out," Thaddeus muttered, slipping into the RV and emerging with his hunting rifle. His face was a mask of tension. Then came a sound that defied logic. A guttural rumble, half growl, half warning. It vibrated through the night, unnatural and alien. I peeked through the screen window, my breath hitching in my throat. A silhouette loomed beside the RV, impossibly tall and malformed. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, ending in claws that glinted under the moonlight. My stomach turned. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was something out of a nightmare. Suddenly, the roof groaned under the weight of something heavy. A low, snuffling breath passed over us, and I felt the heat of it through the thin metal walls. "Thaddeus," I croaked, "don't shoot. We don't know what it is." But he wasn't listening. His knuckles were white around the rifle, his jaw set. The creature began to circle the RV, its steps heavy and deliberate, the claws scraping against metal. My gut told me it wasn't curious, it was toying with us. "Get ready to drive," Thaddeus hissed. I fumbled into the driver's seat, every instinct screaming at me to run. Thaddeus kept his rifle trained on the door as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, shattering the suffocating silence. Headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the abomination. It stood upright now, at least 8 feet tall, its oily skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Its face was worse, a jagged maw splitting its head, lined with needle-like teeth. Eyes like black voids locked onto us, devoid of life, yet brimming with malice. "Go!" Thaddeus bellowed. I floored it, and the RV lurched forward, but not fast enough. The creature lunged, slamming into the side with a force that made the walls groan. Glass shattered as claws raked through the window, slicing into the cabin. "Gun!" I screamed, scrambling for the rifle. Thaddeus fired, the deafening crack filling the RV. The creature screeched, a sound that sent icy needles down my spine, and fell back, clutching its side. We tore through the campground, the tires spitting gravel, but it wasn't over. "Another one!" Thaddeus yelled. I glanced in the mirror. A second creature emerged from the shadows, taller and even more grotesque than the first, its limbs bending in unnatural angles as it sprinted after us. We burst onto the open road, the RV swerving wildly as I fought for control. The creature pursued, its strides too long, too fast. It slammed against the rear, its claws scraping metal. In the distance, the lights of Springdale beckoned. "Head for the police station," Thaddeus barked. We skidded into the lot, crashing through a trash bin before screeching to a halt. We bolted inside, bloodied and frantic. An officer at the desk stood wide-eyed. "What the hell happened to you two?" "Something's out there," Thaddeus gasped. "We're being hunted!" The officer opened his mouth to respond, but a deafening crash silenced him. The creature burst through the glass, its claws swiping through the air. The officer fired, but it barely slowed the thing. It pounced, slamming him to the ground. His scream was cut short, replaced by the wet crunch of bone. "Thaddeus!" I screamed. He grabbed the fallen officer's gun and emptied it into the creature. It howled, thrashing before collapsing in a pool of black ichor. We barely had time to breathe when another screech echoed outside. The nightmare wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, the authorities dismissed the attack as a rabid animal incident. They didn't believe our story, or didn't want to. But I know what I saw. Every night, I hear the scratching at my window. Every shadow feels like it's watching. Some things in the desert shouldn't be found, and once they find you, they never let you go. I woke up to the RV jostling violently, my head smacking the cabinet above me. Still half asleep, I groaned. Guess that pothole was more like a sinkhole, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The air inside felt wrong, heavy with an unfamiliar humidity. The windows showed nothing but towering, overgrown trees, a suffocating forest that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. I'm Jasper. Been living on the road for years now, crisscrossing the country in this RV. The days blur together when you live this way, but I'd taken a detour to visit my sister in Georgia. A glance at my ancient map made my stomach drop. There was no road here, no towns, no campsites. I chuckled to myself, trying to shake off the unease. An unplanned adventure, I said aloud, but the sound of my own voice didn't help. Outside, the silence was oppressive. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of a highway. Just the forest, dark and consuming. After a makeshift breakfast, I grabbed my boots and walking stick to scout the area. The overgrown path I carved out was eerily easy to navigate. The air grew heavier as I moved, carrying with it an indescribable stench. At first, I thought it might be roadkill. Then I saw the clearing. My mind refused to process what I was looking at. At first, I thought it was trash, torn fabric, bits of plastic. But no, it was fur, matted, dark, and clumped together. Bones jutted out from the mess, long and grotesquely twisted. Not quite animal, not quite human. A twig snapped behind me. My heart slammed into my ribs as I spun around, clutching my stick like a lifeline. Nothing, just a squirrel darting up a tree. I laughed, high-pitched and hollow, but my legs were already running before my brain caught up. By the time I stumbled back to the RV, I was shaking. I locked the doors and spent the rest of the day listening, every rustle outside the thin metal walls setting my nerves on fire. Then night came. The first sound was a soft scratch, like fingernails on wood. It crept along the RV, circling. I clutched my shotgun, sweat pooling at the small of my back. Then came the growl, low, guttural, and wet. Something slammed into the side of the RV. Hard. Again and again. Each impact sent vibrations through the floor, rattling my bones. I peeked through the blinds, but saw nothing. Just darkness. The RV rocked violently, metal creaking under the weight of something. My phone. Shaking, I dialed 911. The line connected, but the voice on the other end wasn't reassuring. "Hello? Please help. We're on Highway 76. There. Static. Then silence. Another thud shook the RV, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. They stopped outside the driver's door. My breath hitched as I crawled to the floor, peering under the bed. Clawed feet. Hairless and grotesque, they were too large to belong to any creature I knew. My stomach churned as the thing moved, its shadow stretching across the thin blinds. The roof groaned. Scraping sounds moved overhead. Then came the crash. The skylight above shattered, raining glass and debris. Something massive and wrong plunged through, its limbs too long, its neck too serpentine. The smell was suffocating, like rot and decay. My survival instincts kicked in. I aimed the shotgun and fired, the deafening blast echoing in the confined space. The thing let out a scream, a piercing, otherworldly shriek that made my ears ring and my blood run cold. It thrashed, crashing into walls and furniture before collapsing on top of me. Its weight pinned me down. Its body was cold, wet, and impossibly heavy. I struggled to breathe, to move. Finally, I wriggled free, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I pointed it at the thing. It was monstrous. Its skin was a patchwork of mottled gray and black, stretched taut over its skeletal frame. Its head was too small for its body, its jaw lined with jagged, uneven teeth, and its eyes, milky white and bulging, stared into nothingness. I vomited in the corner, my body shaking uncontrollably. When I regained enough sense to move, I grabbed the shotgun and bolted. The RV felt like a tomb, the forest a trap. I didn't stop until I found the highway, my legs barely holding me up. A car screeched to a halt when I stumbled into its path. The driver, a middle-aged woman, jumped out. Her face was pale as I spilled everything, the creature, the bones, the call. She nodded grimly. My husband went missing last week. Hunting trip. We never found him. Her voice cracked, but her resolve didn't. We need to tell someone, warn them. We told everyone we could, police, rangers, even strangers on the road. Some laughed, some listened. But I knew deep down it wasn't enough. Because they weren't alone. The dispatcher's words haunted me. They're everywhere. And now I see the forest differently. Not as trees, but as shadows hiding what hunts us. I survived, but I left something behind in that RV. My peace, my sanity. And I know, someday, they'll come for me again. The fall of 1997 wasn't supposed to end this way. It was supposed to be another adventure. Me, my best friend Joel, and his girlfriend Sarah, chasing the freedom of the open road and the wild allure of the Smoky Mountains. Joel and I had been inseparable since elementary school, always finding some new way to test our nerves. Sarah was newer to the fold, but she fit right in, outgoing, brave, and as in love with the wilderness as we were. This trip, though, would mark the last time any of us would feel that way about the woods. The drive to Tennessee was perfect. Joel and Sarah joked and bantered in the front seat while I lounged in the back, letting the scenery blur into a tapestry of vibrant autumn colors. When we finally found the campsite, tucked deep into the foothills of a rugged mountain, it felt like magic. The RV nestled perfectly into a clearing by a bubbling stream, surrounded by towering pines whose shadows seemed endless. That first night, we grilled burgers, shared beers, and watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery oranges and purples. But beneath the peace, I felt something, a faint, inexplicable prickle at the base of my neck. The next morning, we decided to tackle a trail that snaked around the mountain's base. It was rough, more a jagged path than a proper trail, but we were up for the challenge. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the calls of birds and the crunch of leaves underfoot. About half a mile in, I heard it, a sharp crack deep in the trees, like a branch snapping under weight. "Wait," I hissed, freezing mid-step. Joel and Sarah stopped, their playful chatter dissolving into silence. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. I strained to listen. Another crack, louder this time, followed by a faint rustle. "Probably a deer," Joel said, but his voice lacked conviction. The air had changed. Heavy now, pressing. It wasn't just the sound, it was the weight of being watched. When we stumbled into the clearing, the sight stopped us cold. In the center stood a rusted Oldsmobile, its skeletal frame consumed by vines and decay as though the forest had been devouring it for decades. "What the hell is that doing out here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The car didn't belong. Not here, not anywhere. As we stood frozen, I caught the scent. Something foul, metallic, and cloyingly musty. It churned my stomach, and then I saw it, a flicker of movement barely perceptible in the shadows of the trees. "We need to leave," I said, my voice trembling. Joel didn't argue. We turned and retreated, our steps cautious at first, then breaking into a full sprint as dread clawed at our heels. The trees seemed to close in around us, the rustling leaves almost mocking. By the time we reached the RV, we were breathless, hearts pounding like war drums. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. We tried to shake it off, blaming nerves or imagination. But that night, the forest became a cacophony of noises. Every rustle, every snap outside the RV had me sitting bolt upright. Sleep was impossible. At dawn, Joel nudged me awake. "Bad dreams?" he asked. "Something like that," I muttered. "We need to leave. Today." Joel hesitated but nodded. "All right, let's pack up." We worked quickly, throwing our gear into the RV with trembling hands. Just as I climbed into the driver's seat, Joel rapped on the window. His face was ashen. "You need to see this," he said. I followed him around to the passenger side where the ground was soft with morning dew. There, etched into the dirt, were footprints. Large, human, but impossibly long and deep. "They've been watching us," Joel whispered. We didn't wait. Gravel sprayed as I gunned the RV down the dirt road, the engine roaring in the quiet morning. Only when we hit the interstate did we breathe again. But the fear didn't fade. It clung to us like a second skin. 2 weeks later, Sarah called Joel, her voice trembling. A hiker had gone missing near a campground not far from where we'd been. The description of the person last seen, tall, gaunt, wearing tattered clothes, matched the fleeting figure I'd glimpsed in the woods. Search teams combed the area for weeks but found nothing. The official story blamed a wild animal, but we knew better. Joel and Sarah's relationship unraveled not long after. She couldn't shake the paranoia, the feeling of eyes in the dark. Neither could I. To this day, I can't look at the mountains the same way. They're beautiful, sure, but they hide things, things that watch, things that wait. And sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, I still smell it, that metallic, musty stench. I still see it, the rusted car, the flicker of movement, and those impossible footprints leading away into the trees. This happened to me a few years ago. I've never been able to shake it or the way it haunts me. The truth is, I've never liked RVs. There's something deeply wrong about them. Too cramped, too sterile, like they're built to shut you in. The plastic smells, the cheap upholstery, the glaringly awful design choices that make them feel more like prisons than homes on wheels. But my fiancée, Alara, was relentless. She called it our grand tour, a chance to visit the lesser-known national parks out west. We'd take our time, go off the beaten path, and in the end, she wore me down. We decided to go for it. 3 weeks, just us, the road, and a beat-up RV. I'm Aizan, by the way. The first week was surprisingly fine. We picked up the RV in Phoenix and made our way north. Zion, Bryce Canyon, places with beauty so overwhelming you forget where you are, where you've been. But Alara craved something more, something remote. She loved the winding roads, the desolation, the feeling of being swallowed by the wilderness, until even your phone gives up on you. That's how we found ourselves on a forgotten dirt road in Capitol Reef National Park, surrounded by towering sandstone cliffs, glowing red in the dying light of the afternoon. The air was thick with the smell of dust and sagebrush. It was spectacular, breathtaking, surreal. We cooked dinner under the RV's awning, and for the first time, I had to admit, maybe the peeling paisley cushions weren't so bad in the fading sun. That was when it happened. A tapping at the driver's side window. I turned, startled. An old man stood there, filthy and disheveled, his skin weathered as though the sun itself had tried to burn him into the earth. His clothes clung to him like they hadn't seen water in weeks. He smiled at us, hesitant but hopeful. "Ran out of gas," he said, his voice rough and dry, like he hadn't spoken in days. "A few miles back. Could you give me a ride to the ranger station? No cell service up here. My knees can't make the walk." The first thing I noticed was how wrong it felt. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse him. But Alara jumped up with that damn radiant smile of hers, insisting we help him, that it was all part of the adventure. She was always the trusting one, the kind of person who believed in helping strangers. And so, against my better judgment, I let him in. The moment he climbed in, the air shifted. There was a musty, sour smell that hadn't been there before, a stench of decay, of something trapped in the confines of that RV for too long. He barely said a word as we started driving back, his hand constantly clutching a faded camouflage backpack, as though whatever was inside it was worth more than his life. My nerves were on edge. I glanced at Alara. Her face mirrored my concern, but she didn't speak. Not until he told us to take a road that wasn't even on our map, a narrow, unmarked path that twisted deeper into the hills. He claimed to know it well, said it was a shortcut, the kind of place he could navigate without hesitation. But my gut told me to turn around, that this was wrong. Every passing minute made me feel more trapped. Then, after what felt like hours, we arrived at a place that wasn't a ranger station, but a forgotten, decaying campsite. Broken fire pits, a half-collapsed shack hidden in the overgrown trees. The place had the look of abandonment, of a memory swallowed by time. My heart pounded. I could feel the panic rising in me, a tightness in my chest. This was wrong. I wanted to leave, to slam the RV in reverse and drive as fast as I could, but Alara was already out of her seat, offering him water, speaking to him softly. I stood there frozen for a moment, and that's when something inside me snapped. Okay, that's enough? I yelled, my voice sharp with fear and anger. Thanks for the ride. The old man muttered something under his breath, his body stiff with a strange energy, his hand tight on the backpack as he slid out of the van. His movements were calculated, too controlled. Then I saw it, the knife. Tucked into his belt, its blade gleaming dully in the fading light. Let's see what's so important, I said, stepping forward, too angry to be scared. Before I could react, his strength exploded. It was brief but brutal, a surge of desperation, of raw power. The knife flashed a glint of silver in the dying sunlight. Alara screamed. I stumbled backward, falling hard on the ground. My breath caught in my throat, heart pounding in my ears, and for a second everything went silent. And then they were gone. I can't remember how long it took, but I eventually found my way back to the main road. The whole time, I felt the heavy weight of something behind me, something in the air, pressing down on me. I kept seeing their faces. Alara's, so full of fear, his twisted grin. And then, nothing. The rangers arrived, searching the area. They combed the hills, the abandoned campsite. They found nothing. The place felt cursed, suffocating. Every shadow seemed to hide something darker. Alara's still missing, and they still haven't found her. The police whispered about hermits, about strange people who live off the grid in those hills, but nothing concrete. No sign of her. No trace. Sometimes late at night when I'm alone, I swear I see the headlights of an RV flickering in the distance from my apartment window. It's just the streetlights playing tricks on me. Or so I tell myself. But I can't escape it. Every time I think back to that place, to that moment, all I feel is the terror, the feeling of something ancient and unyielding, something that shouldn't have been there, but was. The musty smell of pine needles, of something much older and much darker. And Alara, vanishing into that wilderness, swallowed by the vast, unfeeling wild. And no matter how much I try to tell myself it was just a man, just a desperate stranger, I can't shake the feeling that there was something else out there in those hills, something that didn't want us to leave. A year ago, I got caught up in the overlanding craze. You know, the kind of thing you see in those YouTube videos, guys with jacked up rigs disappearing into the wilderness, alone, the open road ahead of them. It seemed like freedom, something I needed after years of staring at the same four walls. Remote work was booming, so I figured, why not have the adventure and the paycheck? The Best Buy parking lot wasn't quite the romance I envisioned when I started wiring up solar panels for my converted camper, but hey, you have to start somewhere. After too many how-to videos and a few weeks of trial and error, I finally got the rig dialed in. A couple of days later, I was pulling out of the driveway, heading west on I-80. I'm not the touristy type. Zion was too crowded, and Yellowstone felt more like a daycare than a national park. I wanted to find those hidden gems, the places no one talks about. So when I saw a small brown sign for Red Basin National Forest, I figured it was worth a detour. The first few miles weren't much. Just a dirt road with sagebrush scattered across the high desert. It felt deserted, and that was exactly what I wanted. Then the road started twisting into these hills. The landscape changed, rocks like nothing I'd ever seen before. Blood red, jagged, twisted into strange shapes. The cliff faces looked like they were on fire, glowing in the setting sun. It was eerie. Something about the place made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I brushed it off. I pulled over, eager to get some pictures, and snapped a few wide shots. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows, making the whole scene even more surreal. That's when I heard it, a rustling behind me. It was quick, like an animal, maybe a rabbit or a lizard. I spun around, but there was nothing. I shrugged it off, then went back to my phone, trying to ignore the strange prickle creeping up my spine. But when I glanced down, something stopped me dead in my tracks. Tracks, but not animal tracks. No way. Too wide, too long, too far apart. And those claws. My stomach dropped. They weren't from anything I recognized. Whatever had made those prints, it wasn't a mountain lion. It was something bigger. I don't know what possessed me to stay as long as I did. I felt like I was being watched, but I convinced myself it was all in my head. I turned on the engine and got out of there fast, not looking back until I was safely back on the interstate. I tried to laugh it off, but even at the rest stop, I felt like something was crawling under my skin. I took the longest shower of my life, trying to scrub off that feeling of being hunted. The next day, I pushed on. Grand Teton was my goal now. Found a nice spot by a river to camp out. The nightfall came quietly, but the feeling didn't leave, and I heard it again. The rustling, something out there moving through the underbrush, circling my RV. First, it was just a thud, something big slamming into the side. Then came the scratching, slow, heavy, deliberate, scraping all the way around the camper. My pulse skyrocketed, my hand gripping the flashlight, the other on my 45. I knew this wasn't an animal. Whatever it was smart, too smart. Then it stopped, right outside the driver's window. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest as I felt its presence. I saw something, a flash of eyes, a silhouette in the moonlight, tall as a bear but leaner, its limbs too long, too angular, barely human. Then it slammed its hand against the glass. The crack echoed like a gunshot. I didn't think. I fired. A shot through the broken window, and the thing let out a shriek. It was inhuman, high-pitched, jagged, filled with a pure, raw malice. I could hear it scrambling off into the trees. I sat there, heart pounding in my ears, waiting for what felt like hours before I dared look outside. Nothing. Just darkness. And the river, whispering its way past. The cops came in the morning, local guys, used to weird calls from out-of-towners. They took my statement, poked around, found nothing. They didn't believe me. Said I was probably on something or just imagining it. I didn't even mention the tracks or those damn eyes. Who would believe that? A couple of months later, I sold the rig. The whole Teton incident shook me harder than I let on. Sometimes late at night, I still think I see movement out of the corner of my eye. And I wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that same scratching at the window. A friend of mine, an ex-ranger named Rory, once told me there are places, real, remote places, that aren't meant for people to stay too long. He said the old stories talk about things that hunt the high country, things that have been there long before us. I asked him if he believed it. He just shrugged, his face going serious. I've seen things I can't explain, things I try not to think about. So yeah, maybe those old stories aren't so far off after all. After that, I traded in the mountains for an apartment in Miami. Lots of people, no wildlife. The biggest predators here are real estate agents. It's not the same as that wild freedom, but at least I can sleep at night. Still, every night before I go to bed, I double check the locks, just in case. This happened to me a few years ago, something you'd usually hear around a campfire, right? The kind of thing you laugh off, a story that doesn't feel real. I used to think the same way. Rational, logical, no time for ghost stories or Bigfoot tales. I was the guy who rolled his eyes at that stuff. But what happened to me? It turned everything I believed upside down. My name's Dean, and I've been second-guessing everything since. I've always loved camping. Not in those pristine, overrun campgrounds with crowds of people, but deep in the wilderness, just me, my old RV, and the solitude. My buddies used to tease me about it, say my RV looked like something out of a 70s cop show. It wasn't anything fancy, but hey, when you've got freedom, who needs luxury, right? This one trip, I decided to head to the Redwoods in Northern California. The place is unlike anything else. Those towering trees, their massive branches weaving together, blocking out the sky. I'd had enough of beaches and tourists. I was craving peace and quiet, the kind of silence that only a place like that could offer. Little did I know that silence was a lie. I found this little dirt road that snaked up the coast, one of those scenic routes you hear about but rarely take. It felt remote, exactly what I was looking for. As night approached, I found a turnout. It seemed far enough off the main road to give me the isolation I wanted. So I parked, cracked open a can of soup, and settled in. That's when things started to get strange. I was eating my soup when I heard it, a rustling outside. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe sniffing around the trash. Then came the sound, a sharp, deafening crack, like something heavy had snapped right next to the RV. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it out the side window. And there they were, footprints. Huge. The kind that no human could make, too big, too wide. And they led straight into the dense brush. My skin crawled. It was a weird feeling, something primal, deep in my bones. My mind kept racing, trying to find an explanation. Maybe it was a bear, I thought, or a poacher. Something that could make sense. But nothing made sense. I stayed locked inside the RV, every door bolted, every window shut tight. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind wouldn't let me. I kept waiting for morning, thinking that once the sun rose, I could just drive off and forget about it. But when dawn finally came, the old RV wouldn't start. I turned the key and the engine sputtered and died. No matter how many times I tried, it was dead. The battery was fine, but there wasn't even a spark. I looked out the window again. More footprints. They were even bigger this time, circling the RV. Almost like something was studying me, trying to figure out what I was. This wasn't normal. Bears don't make prints like that. Poachers don't either. I couldn't explain the feeling that washed over me then. Fear was too weak a word. It was something older, more instinctual, like my body knew I was in immediate danger, but couldn't grasp what kind of danger it was. I tried to call a ranger. I had a signal on my phone, but all I got was voicemail. What was I going to say? Help, there's a monster outside my RV? They'd hang up before I even finished. I tried to stay calm, but there was nowhere to go. My only option was to stay inside and wait. But then it happened. A massive impact slammed into the side of the RV, hard enough to shake the whole damn thing. Something scraped across the roof, claws dragging over metal. I could hear it, even feel it. And then silence. Total, absolute silence. I waited, breath caught in my throat, heart pounding. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. I couldn't move. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek through the front window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A bloody smear across the hood. It was fresh, like something had been dragged there, something big, too big for any coyote. And then the footprints, those monstrous, inhuman prints, were there again, leading away from the RV. But this time they went in a circle, around and around, like whatever it was had been studying me, deciding whether or not to finish what it started. My mind scrambled for an explanation, anything that could make sense of this. A hermit living out here in the woods? A crazed drug addict? But even that didn't make sense. Why was the engine dead? Why were these prints so large, so unnatural? What kind of person could drag an animal's carcass across the roof? No, something else was at work here, something I couldn't understand. I didn't wait around to find out. Grabbing my pistol, I crawled through the back window and bolted into the trees. I ran until I found the main road and flagged down the first car I saw. They gave me a ride back to civilization, but I didn't stop there. Hours later, my RV started back up as if nothing had happened. No engine trouble, no strange occurrences. It worked perfectly. I didn't turn back. I didn't even look in that direction. There are stories about that stretch of coastline, vanishing hikers, strange prints, things people can't explain. The Bigfoot enthusiasts? They love that area, but I'm done with it. I'll never go back to those woods. Some secrets are better left untouched, left buried. And trust me, what I saw out there, it's a secret that should never, ever be discovered. I called up to Riker, my voice low and tight with anticipation. I'm all set for the trip, man. Just need to grab something to eat. Then I'll head over. Riker, my partner in this RV adventure, was always the one pushing me out of my apartment. His idea, a guy's got to get out of his apartment at least a few times a year, or the walls will start closing in, sounded like the kind of thing a guy says when he's not drowning in the same dark humdrum I've been living in. I used to think he was full of it, but after a 6-month bender, I started to get it. I was craving air that didn't smell like stale beer. Now, every year, I let him drag me out on these weekend treks. The road to use always feels like a breath of fresh air, literally. From the flatlands with its endless cows and crops to the rolling foothills to the towering trees and cliffs. Every time Riker's right next to me, ranting about JavaScript or complaining that the whole world doesn't run on Linux. But not this time. No offense, Rye, but sometimes a guy needs silence. I hit the park by dusk, barely any room left for the RV. Lucky for me, I'm driving a smaller rig. Those big boys are parked so tight, it's like a game of human Tetris. Guess that's what happens when the whole damn state of California shares Mother Nature. I spend the afternoon hiking one of the easy trails. A quick stretch after the long drive. Later, I make myself a real dinner, Pasta on the propane stove, which feels gourmet compared to my usual takeout. As night falls, I settle under a blanket of stars, peace settling into my bones. That's when I hear it, a noise. At first, it sounds like someone tossing pebbles, but bigger, heavier. I peek my head out the door, flashlight cutting through the dark. Nothing. Maybe a deer, I think. I turn back in. The next morning, I see them. Tracks. Huge ones. Not from any deer I know. There are only two, and whatever made them was walking on its hind legs. I mutter under my breath. What the hell is that? Riker would probably laugh it off, say I've been watching too much alien junk on TV, but there's a cold knot in my stomach. Something's wrong. That day, I hike deeper. It's a good, long trek, the kind that makes you forget the city, forget everything. I figure the creature that left those tracks is out of sight, out of mind. I'm wrong. On the way back down, the sun dips behind a peak. The woods darken too early. Mother Nature doesn't wait for you. And then up ahead, it. Maybe 20 yards out, this massive thing, tall like a bear, but wrong. Skinny, hunched over, with long, bony limbs, it scrabbles against a tree trunk, its back turned to me. For a moment, my brain short circuits. Aliens. Then maybe a bear. But my gut says no. I creep closer, despite everything screaming at me to turn back. Big mistake. The thing's not clawing at a tree. It's clutching something small, dark, and still. Whatever it is, it's dead. Adrenaline floods my veins. My hands clench into fists, not sure if I want to fight or run, but then it turns, slowly. The neck, so long it stretches with a creak, and then I see its face. No fur, no mouth. Just two empty pits where eyes should be. Black as the bark around it. It tilts its head, almost curious, like it didn't expect me. Like I'm not supposed to be here. Then it screeches. The sound cuts through me like ice. My body locks up, and then run. I'm tearing through the forest, limbs burning, lungs screaming, but I can't stop, not even when I burst out of the trailhead. There's a couple loading bikes near the parking lot. I'm too panicked to explain, so I just wave wildly, gasping, something in there. They look at me like I'm the crazy one. I don't care. I scramble for the RV, slam the door behind me, heart hammering. The keys are in the ignition. I don't even think. I just gun the engine and peel out of the lot, down the mountain road. I keep checking the rear view. Stupid. I know it can't catch up with an RV, but that's not logic talking. It's pure, unadulterated fear. Back at Riker's place, I finally stop. My hands are shaking so bad I down 3 beers just to steady them. I know I'm going to have to tell him about the RV, about the scratches down the side, like something massive had tried to claw its way inside. He's going to be pissed. He'll call me a pussy. Maybe he's right, but deep down, I know he'll believe me. He wouldn't laugh at me. Not Riker. He's been my best friend since diapers. I fire up my laptop, searching for anything that might explain what happened. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, creatures in the woods. There's a lot of crazy out there, but nothing like what I saw. Then I dig into old Native American folklore from the Use area. The tales, some of them are terrifying. I find one about a creature that walks on 2 legs, lures people in with strange noises. The word sends a cold shiver down my spine. Skinwalker. It can't be. It's just a legend, right? But the more I think about it, the more I can't shake the image of that thing's dead eyes. I try to sleep on Riker's couch, but I can't. Every time I start to drift, I see its face. Those pits of emptiness. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the screech. I barely sleep. When Riker shakes me awake, the sun's just starting to creep through the windows. He looks at me, wide-eyed. The cops are, he starts, then stops, staring at me. Jesus, you look like hell. What happened? I can barely speak. I only get out the word, trip. Then I see it. Riker sees it. The RV. The scratches down the side. It looks like something went at it, trying to tear it open. His jaw drops. I wave it off, pulling him inside before the neighbors start asking questions. I try to explain about the tracks, the creature, its shriek, the thing it was holding. My voice shakes as I tell him about its eyes. Riker's known me too long to laugh it off, but as I talk, I see his face fall. Finally, he rubs his forehead. Beer. You need a beer, man. 2 hours and 5 beers later, I'm still trying to convince him. He looks at me like I'm 1 step away from a padded cell. Then, finally, he sighs. Okay, look, even if this is real, and that's a big if, we need a plan. We can't just sit here. He's right. I grip the empty bottle tightly. Tomorrow, I croak. We go back. The next day, we're back on the trail. This time, we're armed. I'm holding a shovel, trying to shake the fear that's lodged in my chest. Riker has the rifle he keeps for emergencies. Funny, though, his emergency isn't some intruder. It's whatever the hell is lurking in the woods. Back at the spot, the ground is churned up, dark, dried footprints. I swallow hard. And then I see it, the remains of whatever that thing caught. Riker mutters, could be its nest. I feel sick, but he's right. We spend hours combing the woods. The silence is suffocating. No animals, not even a rustle in the trees. It's like the whole forest is holding its breath. Then, just as the sun starts to dip, I see it. A footprint. Fresh. Huge. My heart skips a beat. I whisper, it's close. Riker sees it too. He nods, scanning the trees. We need a vantage point. We scramble up the rocky outcrop, rifle slung over Riker's shoulder. From here, we can see deeper into the trees. I'm scanning every shadow, praying for some sign of movement, and then I see it. A shape, hunched and hidden beneath the oak. It's there. My gut clenches. I point. Riker sees it too. He lifts the rifle. No! I want to scream. I want to shout, tell him to wait, to think. But I'm soaked in sweat, my body trembling from the memory of what happened. I can't tell him to stop. The first shot echoes through the forest. A second shot follows. I watch, numb, as the creature jerks, spasms, and collapses. For a long moment, it's still. Maybe it's over. Maybe we've won. Then, it twitches. The limbs scramble against the earth. Another shot. It goes still. Finally, we climb down to it. The stench hits us like a wall. Rotten meat, something worse, that coppery tang. Up close, it's even worse. The skin's stretched over bones that stick out in grotesque angles. Its face, if you could even call it that, is a sick mockery of a human's. Its eyes are black pits. Riker nudges it with the rifle barrel. Dead? I nod. It's dead. But deep down, I know better. Whatever this thing is, whatever it was, it's not gone. It's still out there. We let the cops take the body. They think it's the work of some cult, sacrifices, dark rituals, anything to make it fit into something human. They don't ask about skinwalkers, and we don't tell them. The case is unsolved. But we know better. Some nights, when the wind's just right, I can still hear that screech. When I close my eyes, I see those empty, soulless pits, and I wonder, are we ever really safe? Some scars don't fade. My name's Caden. Yeah, maybe my whole RV life, traveling the country, sounds a little cliche these days, but when you sell your business at 33 for more money than you ever dreamed of, cliches start looking pretty damn good. At least I'm not wasting away in some cubicle, right? I stay busy. I freelance. This May, I found myself in Olympic National Park. Not the beachy part. I'm talking about the rainforest. I discovered this wicked boondocking spot down a gnarly logging road, miles from anyone, tucked beside a rushing little river. It's exactly the kind of place that makes city folk uneasy. But people like me, well, we live for it. The rain drizzled this morning like it always does here, and then as the sun peeked through the clouds, it lit up the moss like neon. I was working, minding my own, when suddenly, thud, a hard bang on the side of my RV like someone threw a rock. But there ain't no one out here. I poked my head out, expecting to see a squirrel, maybe, but nothing. It was then that I heard it, the scratching, low like something dragging long claws across the metal. I glanced around. No bear, no cougar, nothing that could make sense. The sound moved up, scratching at the roof now. Definitely not a squirrel-sized critter. Whatever it was sounded big, too fast. I grabbed my bear spray, the kind that could stop a grizzly in its tracks, but I didn't dare open the door. Whatever was out there, it was beyond my comfort zone. Then, silence. The stillness was thick, suffocating. All I could hear was the buzzing in my ears like my own heartbeat. I waited 20 minutes. Nothing. I figured whatever it was, it had moved on. And yeah, I should have left then. That was the smart move. But curiosity won out. You can call it foolishness or bravery. I call it my nature. I opened the door, stepping out into the quiet. The dense forest stood still, leaves dripping with moisture, but nothing moved. Still, I knew better than to trust the silence. I took another step, moving toward the side of my RV, where the scratching had been loudest. The marks were there, long, deep gashes in the paint, but there were no footprints, no fur, nothing to tell me what I was dealing with. That's when I saw it. Blood, right on the edge of a fresh scratch, a smear of dark red. Not animal blood. The color was wrong, too dark. I didn't smell the usual iron tang of animal blood. Someone had been out here, or something. My heart started racing, but I pushed the fear down. There had to be an explanation, right? Maybe something had attacked the lumberjack I'd seen a couple of weeks ago. A big guy with a beard, one of those quiet mountain man types. He'd been wearing a blue flannel, the same kind of flannel I saw caught on a snag at the edge of the woods. I followed the blood trail, a grim path leading into the trees. It wasn't far, just to the tree line. There, hanging from a branch, was the torn blue flannel. My stomach dropped. This wasn't some isolated incident. Something had torn through this man's clothing, and worse. Adrenaline kicked in, sharpening my senses. I followed the trail deeper, the blood staining the leaves, leading me to a clearing. And then I saw it. The shack. It wasn't a cabin, not a cozy little retreat. This was something far darker. The walls were slapped together from unpainted boards half hidden under mossy vines. A coil of smoke twisted from a crooked chimney. Rusted tools lay scattered around the clearing, along with more scraps of the blue flannel. The place reeked of something foul, wrong. This wasn't a hunter's hideaway. This wasn't abandoned property. This was something else. As I stood there staring at the shack, my body froze. A voice rasped from within, dry and cracked like it hadn't been used in ages. It was pitched too low to be human. Found you. I didn't think, I just ran. The woods blurred around me, the ground giving way beneath my feet as I bolted back toward my RV. I slammed inside, locking the door behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. But the moment I reached for the ignition, I heard it. That scratching sound again. It was back, but now it was dragging across the roof. I crept to the window, barely daring to look out. And there it was. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a cougar. It was something else. Its skin was pale gray, stretched tight over sharp, bony limbs. Its hands, no, its claws were more like weapons. Its head, though, was the worst, a grotesque mockery of a human skull. The eyes sunken, glowing with a sickly light. I could feel its gaze on me, cold and predatory. It grinned at me, a twisted, deformed grin. And that's when I saw it, a strip of blue flannel hanging from its mouth, blood staining its jagged teeth. My blood froze. It wasn't just looking at me. It was toying with me. It crouched on the roof, tapping its claws rhythmically against the metal like it had all the time in the world. I scrambled for something. Anything. My bear spray? Useless. My hunting knife? Good for prepping food, not for fighting a nightmare. There was no fighting this. I needed to get out. The door was blocked. It was watching me. But there was the roof hatch, the one I used to clean my solar panels. I swung it open, trying to make as little noise as possible, and scrambled onto the roof. My breath came fast, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the creature's movements. I glanced down. It was still there. Crouched by the driver's door, those sunken eyes locked on me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't make a sound. It was waiting for me to make a mistake. I jumped. The ground hit harder than I expected, sending a shock of pain through my knees. But before I could process it, I heard it. The creature's awful clicking noise as it leapt from the RV and hit the ground. I ran. I ran as fast as I could. But it was fast, too. Its hooves, cloven hooves, slammed against the earth, propelling it forward in unnatural bounds. I risked a glance back and immediately regretted it. The thing was gaining, its grotesque body moving with terrifying speed. A root caught my foot. I went down hard, gasping for breath as I struggled to push myself up, and then it was on me. It landed with a grunt, surprisingly human, given how inhuman it was. Claws dug into my shoulders, raking deep. I screamed, a pure cry of pain and terror, and thrashed wildly. Somehow I flipped us, and we were rolling, the creature screeching like a broken animal. My hand caught on something, a broken branch. Without thinking, I grabbed it and rammed it up into the creature's chest. It shrieked in agony, its weight shifting off me. I scrambled away, my sobs tearing out of me. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. I didn't stop until I found cover, huddling behind a moss-covered tree, gasping for air. The woods were silent. The creature's screeching had faded. I was alone. But I couldn't stay there for long. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what had happened crashed down on me. Had I killed it? Or was it still out there? I didn't know. By the time I gathered the strength to return to my RV, I found it half destroyed. The door was ripped off, the tires slashed, deep claw marks gouging the metal. And there it was, waiting. But this time it didn't charge. It crouched at the tree line, its sunken eyes locked on me. And then, in the dying light, I saw it clearly. a wooden stake protruding from its misshapen chest. It wasn't coming for me. I turned and walked away. I don't know how I made it out of those woods or how I found the highway or how I flagged down a car, but the people who stopped were kind if shocked by my disheveled state. They gave me a ride back to civilization. The police, they didn't believe my story, of course. Wild animal attack, they said. Or maybe some crazed hermit, easier to swallow than what really happened. I don't know if I'll ever escape what I saw out there. The locals around Olympic, they whisper about the skin taker, something ancient that hunts in the woods. Was that what I saw? Was it wearing the lumberjack's skin before? And now, is it wearing mine? I don't know, but I'm not going back to find out. This happened a couple of years ago, at that dark time in life when weekend trips with the guys started feeling more like routine than adventure. Fun, but predictable. My name's Noah, by the way. I used to be a city rat. Noisy apartment, takeout every night, all the stress that comes with it, until the pressure of it all pushed me to the brink. I had to get away. I turned to hiking, biking, anything that promised some semblance of peace. Thought I'd give camping a shot, get back to nature. My buddy Dean, always the adventurer, found this website that promised undiscovered camping spots. The one that caught our eye? A secluded clearing deep in the Ozarks, Missouri side, near a winding river. No crowds, no park rangers, just us and the open sky. Sounded too perfect to be true. But I was game. We piled into Dean's beat-up RV, packed to the brim with gear. The journey took longer than expected. The access road barely a path at all, and by the time we got there, the sun was dipping below the horizon. We should have called it a night, but the wild called to us. We found a rough clearing just big enough for the RV, surrounded by these gnarled pine trees. Setting up camp didn't take long, just a few folding chairs, basic supplies. Dean, as usual, was intent on fiddling with his telescope, chasing the last bit of daylight. Me? I wanted to explore. The website had mentioned a trail nearby, and the thrill of the unknown was hard to resist. But the deeper I went, the faster that thrill started to turn cold. It's funny how ambition fades when the shadows stretch long and the forest closes in. I should have stuck close to the RV, but curiosity gnawed at me. Maybe I was finally escaping something, breaking free from the suffocating walls of routine. For the first half hour, all was fine, just the familiar sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls. But then, something wasn't right. I saw it first, a lean-to, propped against a massive oak. The fabric was old, worn, mismatched. It wasn't made by any modern camper. The branches pressed so tightly against the tree, they looked deliberately placed, like someone had built a shelter and left it to rot. And then, the smell hit me. A sharp, iron tang mixed with the sickening stench of rotting meat. Clothes lay strewn across the ground, ragged, caked in mud. Some were soaked in dark stains. I didn't want to think about what those stains were. But beside that makeshift camp was something wrapped in dark, torn canvas. Something heavy. Still. I should have turned and ran. I should have called Dean. Anything. But a morbid curiosity rooted me to the spot. Slowly, I approached, my phone's flashlight flickering weakly against the darkness. And that's when I saw it. Boots. Sticking out from the tarp. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. My brain screamed at me to get out, but I couldn't. I was frozen. The boots didn't move. No chest rising, no breathing. I was staring at a body. And that's when I knew. This person was dead. Left to rot, abandoned. The smell was overpowering now, sickening. I realized that whatever had killed them, whatever had abandoned them here, wasn't far off. I didn't know why I started running. My legs were moving before my brain could process what had happened. I pushed through the trees, the flashlight bouncing wildly. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then I saw the faint glow of the campsite through the trees. I burst through the underbrush, gasping, calling for Dean. But when I reached the camp, he was sitting in his chair, peering through his telescope like nothing was wrong. "Noah, you've got to see this," he said, pointing upward to the stars, oblivious. That's when he saw the look on my face. He stopped, his brow furrowed in confusion. Before I could speak, before I could even warn him, we heard it. A scream. Not human. Not animal. A sound from the deepest parts of the earth. It was a scream that tore through the night. Something was coming. There was movement in the woods. Impossible speed. Rustling. The snapping of branches. We stood frozen, paralyzed. Then another scream, a sound that seemed to rend the very air. Dean bolted for the RV and I followed, panic flooding my veins. We barely made it inside, slamming the door behind us. But just as the engine started, we heard it. A deafening thud against the side of the RV. The metal groaned, the door rattled. Then another scream, closer this time. Dean floored the gas pedal, throwing me to the floor as the RV lurched backward, metal scraping against the ground. Blood trickled down the side of my face from where I hit my head, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the woods. There was someone, no, something, standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the moonlight. Tall, emaciated, skin a sickly gray. The air around it felt wrong. Its eyes glowed, a deep, unnerving amber, and they locked onto us. It was like it knew we were watching, like it could sense our fear. I heard something scraping against the door. Fingers? Claws? Whatever it wasn't human. Another scream split the air, and Dean lurched the RV into gear, sending us barreling toward the road. But it didn't chase us. It just watched. We tore down the access road, my mind spinning, my body shaking. The trees pressed close on either side, but as we reached the main road, I thought we might be safe. Maybe. Just maybe. Then came another scream from the woods beside the road. A crash. And before I could even react, something massive hit the roof of the RV. The metal screamed, the fiberglass crunched. We were being clawed at, ripped apart by something desperate, hungry. Dean swerved, tires spinning, nearly tipping us into a ditch. I didn't dare look back, but the sound of whatever was on the roof tearing into us filled the air. The stench of decay started to seep into the RV, and I felt my stomach churn. We didn't stop. We didn't even slow down. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a highway rest stop. It was the first time I could breathe, the first time I thought maybe, just maybe, we made it out. We didn't speak much after that. The damage to the RV was catastrophic. Deep gashes across the side, cracked windows. We were lucky to make it back at all. The police found nothing out there, just ravaged campsites, discarded belongings. Their faces said it all. The disappearances, the strange attacks, all written off as animal attacks. But I know better. We both know better. Now, every hike, every walk in the woods, there's a voice in my head reminding me of what we saw, of what's still out there. The wild doesn't feel like adventure anymore. It feels like something else, something dark, waiting just beyond the edge of understanding. I never stray far from the trail now, and I always keep an eye on the shadows. A few years ago, time's a bit of a blur now, honestly, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. I've always been the type to rough it. Even before retirement, weekends meant loading up the RV, disappearing into the wilderness. My wife hated it. Couldn't stand being outside for more than 5 minutes. But who needs that constant nagging, right? My name's Jasper, by the way. This particular weekend, I had a wild urge to explore Siowa National Park in California. If you've never seen those towering trees, you're missing out. Truly massive. Anyway, as always, I got bored of the campgrounds and the noisy tourists, took the RV off-road, following one of the dirt trails on the park map. My goal was to find some secluded patch of forest, far away from the crowds. It didn't take long to find the perfect spot. A small, isolated clearing beside the trail, hidden deep behind a thick batch of trees. The ground was rocky, uneven, but who cares about that when you're alone in the woods? The silence, the solitude, it was exactly what I craved. But from the moment I settled in, something was wrong. It was too quiet, like unnervingly so. No crickets, no owls, not even the faint rustle of a critter in the brush. Just a dead, suffocating silence. I tried to brush it off, started cooking some beans on the tiny stove, flipping through a magazine to pass the time before turning in early. That's when it started. At first, it sounded like footsteps, heavy stomps, slow and deliberate, coming from the dark beyond the RV. I thought it was a bear, maybe something big enough to knock the RV around a bit. Then I heard something else. Breathing, wheezing, wet, raspy breaths, like it was struggling to suck air in. But it wasn't the sound of any animal I knew. I grabbed my pistol, not that I thought it would do much against a grizzly, but it's enough to scare off the usual wildlife. The thing was, the breathing sounded close, too close. It was as if whatever it was had drawn near, was lurking right outside the RV. I couldn't help it. I peeked out the window. There was nothing in the moonlight. Just shadows, deep, shifting shadows that seemed to move, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or just my mind playing tricks on me. That's when the footsteps started circling the RV. Around and around it went, slow, deliberate. It was as if whatever it was studying me, checking me out. My heart was hammering in my chest. I couldn't sleep after that. The night felt like it would never end. When the first light of dawn finally crept over the horizon, I wasted no time. I broke camp in a hurry, threw everything into the RV, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror for a while, but halfway down the road, something made me glance back, and I wish I hadn't. There, smeared across the back of the RV, were handprints. Massive, filthy handprints, way too big to be human. 5 stubby fingers on each hand, and what looked like claw marks gouging the metal beneath the dirt. I tried to tell myself it was just some teenagers, a prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The real nightmare came later. When I stopped at a rest stop to use the bathroom, I checked my phone. There it was, a news alert. Missing hiker found in Siowa. They discovered his abandoned campsite, not far from where I had parked the RV the night before. His gear was shredded, torn to pieces. The report mentioned something strange. His SUV was found covered in those same massive handprints I saw. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process it. I'd been there. And now I was connected to whatever the hell was hunting in those woods. I never went back to that part of the park. Never talked about it either, except this one time. People wouldn't believe me anyway. Who would? Who would believe that something could stalk you, could have torn the RV apart if it wanted, just chose to watch instead? It could have smashed through the walls and dragged me out of there, kicking and screaming, but it didn't. It chose to wait. And that fact, well, it still chills me to the bone. Here's the worst part, though. The missing hiker wasn't the only one. Over the next few months, whispers started to spread about other disappearances, mostly backcountry campers, that folks who disappeared without a trace. No evidence. Nothing to explain it. I knew, though. Deep down, I knew that thing, the thing that circled my RV, was behind it all. Look, maybe it just wanted to scare me off. Maybe that's its territory, or maybe it's been hunting those woods for years. Hell, maybe it wasn't even the same creature that attacked those other campers. But after that night, I couldn't look at the wilderness the same way. The isolation I'd once craved, now it tasted like death. It wasn't about finding peace anymore. I learned the hard way that there are things out there in the dark that shouldn't exist. Things you don't go looking for, and damn sure things you don't want to find you.